Pleased to be joined now by the president and director, top guy at the Senior Bowl, executive director Jim Nagy joins the show. Jim, thanks so much for joining us. Chris Trapasso, Steve Tasker here. And I got to say, we just got back from the Combine, and we always go through this, but this year, it really seems like the Senior Bowl, the thing that you run and kind of get off the ground, really seems to be one of those things that top prospects need to check off their list. The displayed desire to play in that game says something to NFL scouts and head coaches that really goes a long way for a lot of these players. Is that true?
I hope so, Steve. I hope all the hard work we've put in over the last 5 years is starting to get that way. I mean, the Senior Bowl's been a great game for a long, long time. We've had 181 first-round picks since the year 2000. No other All-Star game has had one. So, it's been a great game. I just think we've utilized social media to try to connect with these players, helping our recruiting. You did see it a lot more at the Combine this year. I heard it a lot more at the Combine. And even the Combine coverage. You would have thought I paid DJ and Rich Eisen to drop Senior Bowl a bunch, but we didn't. But no, there was a lot of clips of Senior Bowl practice and everything. And I do think, back to your point of just putting myself back in the NFL and trying to really gauge like which of these guys love football. I think it's getting harder and harder for these clubs. And I think when the guys come to the Senior Bowl and are willing to put themselves out there, that makes a statement, man, that they really love it. And then they, in guys that play in the game, we lost some guys the last couple of years that didn't want to play in the game. But you see your way through the entire week. I mean, you're making a clear statement to these NFL teams how much you love ball, because it's important right now, and it's also important 4 or 5 years from now when these guys reach free agency, and these teams are trying to figure out, okay, what's going to happen to the work ethic part of it once we pay them, right? And Steve, I know you had teammates. You saw this a lot when you were in the league. Guys get paid and their production drops off, right? Their work ethic drops off. So I think these guys are all making a statement when they come to Mobile.
Yeah, Jim, follow up to that. Me as a draft analyst, first and foremost, I'm always fascinated by the job that you and your predecessor, Phil Savage, did, finding these Division III, FCS, Division II guys to bring into the Senior Bowl that don't just play well during that week of practice, but ultimately become really good players, Taron Johnson being one of them here in Buffalo. Can you kind of just summarize how you and your scouting department starts really early and is able to find someone like a Kyle Duggar or a Taron Johnson and ultimately can identify that they're good enough to be in the Senior Bowl, but also good enough to be quality NFL players once they're drafted?
Right, Chris. Well, first of all, man, we've never met face to face, but you do a great job with all the draft stuff. I got to say that before we get going.
You.
I love seeing your stuff. Spencer Brown's another one up there in Buffalo from Northern Iowa a couple years ago. I'll say this: it's about relationships. And Phil was in the NFL a long time before he sat in this chair, and I was too. And again, we're not gonna be able to dig out the Quinn Miners out of Wisconsin Whitewater, or Ben Barch from Division III school St. John's in Minnesota without help from buddies around the league. Now we'll start every year, and we've already started the process for 2024. We'll look at all the returning starters at the FBS level. That's kind of where we start. But for those lower levels, we go through all American lists and all conference lists, but a lot of times it's a phone call. A lot of times it's a phone call from a buddy that you've been in the league with a long time, like, hey Jim, you better take a look at this guy from Lenore Rhine, for instance. So the Seahawks Combine scout, Ryan Florence, who I was in Seattle with, he was the Combine scout that went into Hickory, North Carolina for the first time and saw Kyle Duggar.
Wow.
And he's like, man, I just measured a kid that's 6'0", 220 pounds, and he just ran 4.43 for me, Jim. You got to take a look at this guy. So,
right.
Sir, we really lean into our relationships quite a bit. So I got to give the NFL guys a lot of credit for helping us.
One of the things that makes the Senior Bowl different, particularly for coaches, not just scouts, but coaches, is the practices. I mean, the coaches are down there. They're standing there watching these drills, and certainly there's a staff that's running these guys through their paces. But being able to listen and to watch these players practice up close tells guys who do that for a living a lot about these players. The Bills, since 2017, the Bills have taken 16 guys in the draft from the Senior Bowl. That's 43% of the guys that the Bills picked in the draft are from the Senior Bowl. They also signed 4 undrafted free agents from the Senior Bowl. It really, the atmosphere that you create, and I want to ask you this. I know the players are a big part of it, getting those guys to, which players should be there. Can you get them to play? Who's going to coach the game is a lot of it. But there's also something else about the Senior Bowl that makes it special, and that's the atmosphere on the field during the week. How do you cultivate that to make it exactly what you want it?
It's just hyper competitive. And these teams are trying to see these guys in the really competitive moments. I'll give the Bills a lot of credit, man. They come down here in full force. Brandon Beane's down here every year, down on the field in the middle of these drills. And again, it's the little things that you can't pick up on the college tape. It's, when you're up in the one-on-one O-line, D-line drills, right? Like that's just an example. Those guys go back-to-back reps. So there's usually a winner and a loser. Now, you want to see how a guy bounces back. You're reading facial expression. You're reading body language. You're seeing the offensive line coach pull a guy like Spencer Brown aside, give him a coaching point before the second rep, and you're seeing how quickly he can apply a coaching point. So there's so many great takeaways. Again, as a scout, as a front office, you're always looking for things you can't see on the college tape that you get in Senior Bowl practices and just the competitive environment. I mean, it is juiced up down there. These guys are coming from all over the country, and they all are trying to prove themselves. I think that's the biggest thing for me in this role. I didn't realize like the leveling of anxiety that even the big school guys, the SEC level guys, they're down here trying to prove themselves too. So yeah, I mean, it's a great takeaway for all those guys. And I give guys like Brandon and Mike Tomlin's a fixture. Mike Tomlin's up in the middle of just about every single drill down here. So the guys, the teams that really roll up their sleeves and dive into it, I think some of the takeaways are invaluable.
All right, I would kick myself if I did not ask you some specific prospect scouting questions. 2 players that I really like a lot, I think would be good fits in Buffalo. I want your take. Wide receiver is kind of the most marquee position that Bills fans, I think, want Buffalo to address at some point in the draft, probably earlier rather than later. What can you tell us about 2 guys in quick summary? Jaden Reed from Michigan State, who I know had a good week down there in Mobile, and Rashee Rice, the guy that I just mocked to Buffalo in the first round after what he did, jumping 41 inches at the combine.
Yeah, the Bills got Khalil Shakir from down here last year, and just talking to those guys, I think they're really excited about what year 2 is going to look like for Khalil. But yeah, Jaden Reed's a guy that we've had our eye on for a couple of years now. He was a junior graduate last year, so we thought we were going to be able to get him. We thought he might come out. He stayed in, so we've got really a long body of work on Jaden Reed, 3 years of work. And in receivers, a dependent position. The guy wasn't even the most productive receiver numbers-wise at Michigan State this year, but he comes down here. He looks quick and fast, a really nuanced route runner, can get himself open. To me, I think he's a starting slot right away. For whoever drafts him. I think he's going to be a day 2 guy, probably in the 3rd round range. That's where we've kind of had Jaden over the past 2 years. Now, he wasn't being talked about that a lot in the media prior to Senior Bowl week, just because of the numbers. But I think now he is. I think he's back. He's being talked about where he should be. And then Rashee, again, the combine was big for Rashee because you saw the explosiveness. You saw low 4.40, 40-inch vertical jump, great contested catch guy. At SMU, that's really what you like about him when you watch the tape. He plays big and strong when people are around him. SMU's cranked out some really good receivers over the last couple of years with like Danny Gray, James Prochet. There's been a number of those guys that have went to the league and done well. So Rashee's kind of the next in line. I do feel like he needed a good combine, and he delivered. He did a really nice job in Indy.
So you've sat there and you meticulously craft these rosters from college guys all over the country. You see them come in there. You watch them through the entire week. You kind of nurse this thing from start to finish. Is there a handful or maybe a couple of guys that you saw come into the Senior Bowl, maybe from East Nowhere State or wherever you want to pick, and now you're seeing them. They came to the Senior Bowl and killed it, and then they went to the Combine and killed it. Are there any of those guys that You know what I'm saying? That turn into your favorite of the group that nobody else knows about?
Yeah, I'll actually pick a couple guys that didn't get combine invites. Why don't we do it that way? Like Carl Brooks is a defensive lineman from Bowling Green. Had a great year for him. I think he hit double-digit sacks. I think he was a 10-sack guy. Bowling Green this year. Now, you watch the tape. They play him on the edge a bunch. He's playing on 2 feet, doesn't have his hand in the dirt. And you watch him, and you think he's like 265 pounds, 275, 270. Kind of looks like Boogie Bashamish from like a body type perspective on tape. And then, their head coach, Scott Leffler, is a buddy of mine from college. And I hit him up in November. I'm like, Scott, what does this Brooks kid weigh right now? And he was 293. So he's got movement skills that kind of belie his size, and you can move him all up and down the front. Now, Senior Bowl week, he played nose, and he got pressure on the quarterback from the nose tackle position. So he's a versatile rush guy, didn't get a combine invite. I think he ends up going in the fourth or the fifth round. And then another guy is Marte Mapu from Sacramento State. And now I will point the finger at us. We didn't do a good job on Marte. He wasn't really on the radar coming into Senior Bowl week. And he goes to the NFLPA All-Star game and has a great week out there. He was the Big Sky Defensive Player of the Year, kind of a linebacker, strong safety tweener, kind of Kyle Duggarish, if you will. And he came here at 217 pounds and just played downhill in the run game stuff. Got his hands on a bunch of balls in the pass game stuff. And again, we didn't get him right. We weren't on him enough. And I'll credit the Dane Vandernet at the NFLPA game for digging out Marte from Sac State. And now I've heard some stuff like third round. He might end up being a day 2 guy as a non-combine invite. And the last guy to go that high was Kevin Byard, who's become a Pro Bowl player in Tennessee. That's the highest drafted non-combine guy. So those are 2 guys that, weren't in Indy that, I don't think will be there after the 4th or 5th round.
Yeah, I want to ask one more question about the safety position, because we've talked about Tremaine Edmonds, we've talked about receiver. The Bills probably are going to lose Jordan Poyer in free agency this offseason, or there's a good chance of it. 2 safeties that, and this is, again, going back to your scouting background in the NFL, Kayvon Merriweather and Daniel Scott. How do you, now as the director of the Senior Bowl, look at these safeties and say, hey, look, maybe one of these guys has some warts in terms of his refinement, his tackling ability, but he's a great athlete compared to someone that maybe like Kayvon, that's not quite as athletic. I know the Bills with Micah Hyde and Jordan Poyer, they've had 2 very cerebral, instinctive safeties for a long time. They have to move forward and kind of draft that next safety at that key position in the NFL. What did you see with Daniel Scott and Kayvon Merriweather kind of being different types at the safety spot?
Yeah, Daniel's been one of our favorite guys over the last 2 years. Now, we didn't extend an invite to him last year, and he went back to school. And a guy that used to be on our scouting staff, Zach Boshin, is now the DPP at Cal. And he let us know. He's like, Nags, one of the big reasons he came back, he wanted to get that Senior Bowl invite. And the biggest thing with Daniel going backwards a couple of years was a play strength issue. I use the term dish raggy a little bit. Like he slid down some tackles, he fell off some stuff. Came back this year, and you could tell, even when he was just in shorts and t-shirts at the combine, the work that Daniel Scott has put into his body. I mean, this dude is a physical presence now. We've always loved his range. I think finding free safeties is harder than finding strong safeties. Yeah. You might agree with that, Chris. Right. I'm not sure, but right. He's got range in the back end. He's got eyes when he plays from depth, and he's got ball skills. And those guys are to me harder to find. And he tested off the charts in Indy. He ran 4.45, did all the jumps. I mean, his 3 cone was 6.7 something. He was off the charts that way. And then Kayvon was a guy that we watched Riley Moss, the corner at Iowa, pretty closely the last couple of years. And Kayvon was a guy we set up cross checks in our scouting system where guys from outside the area, if we get draftable grades in, we have another scout on the staff cross-check those guys in addition to myself. So for all these guys, we have at least 3 looks on all the players. And the guy that we had cross-check Kayvon was Walter Juliff. So Walter's like one of the most senior scouts, probably the dean of scouts right now in the NFL. He worked for the Cowboys for 30-some years. He went to Oakland. He was Mike Mayock's right-hand guy, kind of, got let go with the Raiders. We were lucky to have Walter for probably 1 year. He'll probably be back with the team next year. but he thought Kayvon was the best tackling safety he saw this year. So that gave us real conviction that Kayvon's a good player in run support. And you say, like, athletically, like, he didn't run a great 40 time, ran in the 4.6s, but Kayvon was a guy that had, Division I basketball offers out of high school. He actually was thinking about playing basketball at Western Michigan before he got the Iowa football invites, or the Iowa football offer. So yeah, those two guys are very different. But that's kind of our background on both of those guys.
When you look at this draft and the way it's coming down, you've seen most of the high draft picks and the top-notch prospects coming down to this draft. We've started getting some information and some projections, like mock drafts and all this. Some people have this as maybe a 4 top 10 quarterback draft class, or maybe 4 guys go in the top 10. We've also heard a lot of scuttlebutt about the tight ends being a high draft class in tight ends. And then yesterday we had a guest that said he thought there may be as many as 6 offensive tackles go off the board in the first round. What are your thoughts on that, this being that kind of draft for not only the quarterbacks, which are always a little bit elevated in their draft status, but the tight ends and the offensive tackles being such a hot commodity in this draft class?
Yeah, and I'd say I would add the corner class in there too, is the corner class, especially since Senior Bowl. We had some guys down here show up big time that I guess surpassed our expectations, my expectations personally, like Julius Brents from Kansas State, Darius Rush from South Carolina. Those guys have got themselves into day 2. They probably weren't day 2 guys before Mobile. They both went to Indy and crushed it as well. But yeah, I think the tight end group is a good class this year. I think there's a lot of combo tight ends, a lot of guys that can block and run routes and catch the football. That's a good class. The quarterback thing's going to be interesting. We saw some teams wait on quarterback last year with like Desmond Ridder, Malik Willis, those guys, even up into the week of the draft. I was talking to teams around the league that thought both those guys were going to be first-round draft picks, and they slid to the 3rd. So we'll see. There's a lot of Will Levis talk, Anthony Richardson talk in the top 10 right now. I think Bryce Young and CJ Stroud are locks in the top 10. We'll see with those other 2 guys. But, and maybe even Hendon Hooker could sneak up there in the first round. But, yeah, certainly tight end is a good class. I agree on the tackle stuff. I think the early narrative was that this wasn't a great offensive line class. And I think it's proven to be, Senior Bowl week. I think a lot of those guys showed out, and at the Combine as well.
So Steve and I could sit here for hours on end talking about the Bills, but to have a national media member come on, I always want to ask, how do you view the Bills' biggest draft needs? I know free agency will change things a little bit. And if you were in the Bills scouting department, how would you try to attack this draft, understanding positional depth, saying, hey, look, like maybe receiver, we can get someone that is probably the 4th or 5th wide receiver off the board later. How would you attack it in those first couple of rounds if you were a scout for the Buffalo Bills, again, understanding this draft as a whole?
Well, Chris, you're catching me a little off guard with the team needs for the Bills, and you guys are the experts there. I will say you really – the best thing to do when you're in a front office is really dig into the depth. And you're going to have to see, okay, where do we maybe need to strike early, and where is the depth reaching into day 3? I do think you're going to be able to get some tight ends in the 4th round if you need one there. I think you're going to be able to get some good corners there. I mean, there's certain positions. Now, offensive line, I think there's going to be a run. I think you look across the league this year, it wasn't just Buffalo. Excuse me. I think there was a lot of teams that struggled on the offensive line. So I think a lot of those guys are going to get pushed. I think you're probably going to have to take those guys pretty early. But you're putting up some good names right now on the screen. A lot of all those guys, top 50 players. I think all those guys are safely top 50 players right now, the way I'm looking at it. I think you could see 10 of those guys maybe go off in the first round. That's a position you probably will have to get one early if you're going to want like a high impact right away starter. I think that's the group you're going to have to dip into.
All right, I'll give you a softball after that difficult question, Jim. How many first rounders from the Senior Bowl are you and your staff expecting to hear their name called in April?
Well, the last 4 years we've averaged 7.
Wow.
And looking at this year's crew, I think there's probably 7 to 10 or 11 that realistically could go. Not saying they all will. It depends on how it falls, but I think there's, where our class is probably hurt a little bit this year. There isn't a quarterback unless Hendon goes, sneaks in. Someone tries to get that 5th-year option on Hendon Hooker. But I think the offensive line class, I think the D-line group, I think that's where we're going to see most of our guys. So I think it's probably going to settle somewhere around where that average was, a 7.
Jim, thanks so much for spending time with us. Congratulations on another great year, a great addition to the Senior Bowl, and we wish you all the best, and we'll catch up with you in the future. Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Appreciate you having me on.